If you're in the UK, good evening. If they're in the US or Canada, good afternoon.
And if you happen to be in Japan or Australia, good morning and welcome to the Magic of Wrestling podcast.
Awesome, awesome. On today's show, we talk Mandy Rose's release. Vince is rumored to going back to WWE. New Japan Wrestle Kingdom, Carl Anderson's opponent's finally been revealed. All that and more. And what have we got for our main event?
Beyond the Mat.
Ooh, I felt that. Intern, let's see that music, shall we?
Roll.
I love that music. I'm just going to say that.
That's dope, dude. I love that.
Absolutely. Of course, it's Saturday night again, guys. It's, of course, the Magic of Wrestling. I am, of course, the magician.
And I am the effing expert. You can find me a little bit everywhere, a little bit of here and there, everywhere. Mr. Isaacs.
I'll say, I've got to be honest, you are literally everywhere at the moment. I mean, how do you keep up?
I don't know, man. I just, if somebody hits me up and says, hey, you want to be on the show? Sure, why not? Let's do it.
Good evening, Mr. Graham.
What's up, Joe? Hey, noob. How's it going?
There you go. How's your week been anyway? Had a good one?
Yeah, not too bad, man. The I6 household has been on quarantine because of COVID, but, I think we're all doing a little better. Nobody else has gotten sick thus far, so hopefully we're out in the clear here.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I mean, COVID's hit. It's really, really bad. Is it still bad in your area, or?
It's gotten pretty bad over the past month or so. It's kind of that triple effect of like the flu, and then the RSV virus is hitting children like crazy, and then COVID on top of all that. So, yeah, it's been a little rough the past month here in this part of the country.
Wow. Hopefully, of course, hopefully everybody in the household rests up and come back strong really, really quick.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
So I'm going to start off with something a little bit funny. I'm going to show you this image, and I'm sure you're going to laugh at it anyway. Do you remember this one?
Yes, I do. Our new logo.
There you go. I mean, you said you look like a cable guy. Please explain.
Yeah, so when Aaron, Canada Dry, for those out there, was working on this image, and he sent it to me earlier this week, and he was like, look at this. What do you think about this? And I was like, oh, it looks cool. Liam looks like he's, trying to like go to door to like sell you some kind of Ponzi scheme or something. And I look like I'm there to like upgrade your cable package.
Oh dear.
Work on your internet or something. I'm here to sell you high speed internet.
Is that your new nickname, the cable guy?
I heard Canada Dry say that he wanted that to be part of my nickname now. I don't know. The effing expert cable guy, maybe. I mean, I guess that would work.
You're literally going to get a point where the whole thing at the bottom just could be your name.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to replace the ticker at the bottom, and it's just going to have to be like my name, which is like 10,000 different names. It's like if you tried to write down the number for pi, it's 3.14 and then infinity. That's my name.
Yeah, literally. So stay tuned. You never know. It might actually go. But anyway, enough rambling on. Let's get into some news, shall we? Let's get into our part one.
Sir.
We call Magic Week. I need to make that longer because I keep vibing to it. I really do.
It seems like it should be about 5 seconds longer at least.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right. Of course. So this is a part of the show where we talk about the news, what's been going off over the past week. Now, of course, the big story coming out of WWE is Mandy Rose has been released. Now, there's obviously some certain content which has upset WWE. Your thoughts on all this?
It's unfortunate. Because I think Mandy Rose showed a lot of growth when she went to NXT. I think her matches were good. I think her promos were good. I think Toxic Attraction as an act were fantastic together. I'm really disappointed by this. And the details are a little murky, depending on who you're getting your source from. Because we don't know when the WWE knew, if the WWE knew, how long they knew. if there's something in her contract that forbids this. Like these are all kind of details I've seen fans speculating about online, but we don't know for sure. So I don't want to say definitively one way or the other who's 100% at fault here. I just hope that maybe sometime down the road they can resolve this issue, kind of like they did with Zelina Vega. She came back, and she had a big issue with them over her Twitch stream, and I think she had an OnlyFans as well. I think this will be the same thing. I would expect she'll probably be back at the Royal Rumble.
Interesting. Do you think, obviously, people are saying that WWE's been backed into a corner. Do you think that's accurate, or do you think that's just speculation?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, the rumors that I read said that Mattel had a problem with it as the distributor of their toys, all their kids' merchandise, their toys and everything. I don't know. I would say that there'll probably be some resolution here. I'm hoping there is. If not, it's rumored that she's making triple doing that than what she was earning under her WWE contract. So, I mean, if that's the case, then, she's probably probably better off doing what she's doing.
Yeah, well, we shall definitely see. But of course, if she has been released, is it 30 days where she can obviously look elsewhere?
I know it's 30 days for NXT content. I think it's 90 days for main roster people.
Does Mandy Rose fall under the NXT or the main roster, though, really?
See, I would say she falls under her main roster contract because she was there and then they just put her in NXT. I'd be highly surprised if she had an NXT talent contract.
Right, yeah. I mean, that's a fair comment, but I suppose in the next 30 days we shall see. Or the Royal Rumble, as you mentioned. But of course, right, the next story is now, I saw this on a dirt sheet and I'm thinking, surely this is not actually true. But then it kept cropping up everywhere else. So I thought, surely there's got to be something going off here. Of course, it's Vince is rumored to be going back to WWE. Where do you start with this one? I mean, go ahead.
This isn't happening. I mean, this is just something where, Vince has expressed to somebody that he wants to come back, but it's a totally unrealistic thing. I can't let him come back. Like, I mean, they just can't. I mean, it would be like corporate suicide for them to do so. I could see the possibility of him coming back as a very, very short one-off on-screen appearance.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not even sure that's ever going to happen. I think he's done. I don't think there's any way that the people in power there with the corporate structure is going to allow him to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think people at WWE is going to think, obviously, with these rumors? Like, I'm talking talent-wise.
I would say the talent probably knows better. Like, they probably know he's not coming back. It would be kind of ridiculous to rehire like 15 people or whatever, and then Vince come back in and fire all 15 of them again. So I doubt any of them are really worried about their job based on this report alone. Yeah, I'd say it's a non sequitur here. They're probably not worried.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I speak for everybody. I don't want to see it because I feel like Triple H has done an amazing job. I mean, he's obviously the product I do feels on the up, but if the rumors are true, who knows? I mean, what can we say to that, really?
Yeah, I don't think he's coming back, and I do agree. I think Triple H is doing a good job. I thought SmackDown last night was terrific. They're going in the right direction. They just need to keep making these baby steps and go the right way.
Neil reckons it was because of the documentary on Vince. It could be. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to check out the new Vince documentary. I'm going to try to watch it here soon, but I haven't had a chance to yet.
Yeah, it's obviously Aaron's obviously told me about it. It says it's really, really good. So I think we should obviously watch it. I think we should actually do an episode like this about it. Just literally talk about the whole thing.
We can do that. Sure.
Absolutely. So next topic is now Carl Anderson's Wrestle Kingdom opponent has obviously been announced. It is, of course, Tama Tonga. Now, originally I thought this was obviously Hikuleo, but you obviously corrected me on this. So go ahead.
Yeah, so he wrestled Hikuleo, I think, last weekend, and he defeated him. And then there was some kind of confrontation between him and Tama Tonga. They've been building up this match with him and Tama Tonga for half a year now. So this is going to be the big payoff at Wrestle Kingdom. I strongly figured that Carl Anderson would go back at least for one more shot and probably drop the title. I just figured that under Triple H's era of WWE, they'd be willing to do that. And I'm glad to see that he is doing that. I think that's going to be a good match. I think Anderson's going to drop the belt and he's going to leave New Japan, come back to WWE.
Interesting. Obviously, you mentioned there drop it title. Do you think this is obviously? Do you think it's a certain that it's going to drop the title to Tonga?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's certain. I'd say it's the most likely outcome. Yeah, I mean, I don't see them dragging this out. I think Tama Tonga is going to take the title from him, and then he's going to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, speaking of Wrestle Kingdom 17 as a whole, I mean, there's some pretty good matches there on the card. I mean, what you reckon?
Yeah, I haven't really looked over the card in detail, but Wrestle Kingdom always delivers. I mean, I signed up for New Japan World, I think 3 years ago, and Wrestle Kingdom is always great, and they usually split it into multiple nights. I think this past year it was even 3 nights, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a really good show. It's always going to deliver. I look forward to it. I need to kind of catch up on my New Japan a little bit to see who all's going to be on the card, but looking forward to it. And I want to see that big looming shadow of whether or not Sasha Banks is going to be there. I want to see it.
Yes. I mean, I'm actually looking forward to it. I'm going to watch it myself. But do you think she'll obviously turn up?
I hope so. I really do. I think it's good for pro wrestling if she does. I think this could be a very positive boost for women's wrestling outside of WWE. So I really hope this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, do you think it'll make a big statement?
Yeah, I definitely think that'd make a big statement, especially with the new IWGP Women's title. And I see Joe Graham's comment too about this is the first time they're going to be able to cheer. Yeah, when you watch these New Japan shows over the past couple of years of the pandemic era, the fans are not allowed to cheer, so they just clap. Every time something happens, they clap, and that's the only sound that the crowd has made for 2 years. So that the crowd will be pretty hype about this.
Is this because of obviously all COVID and stuff?
Yeah. I mean, in Japan, they're more of a collectivist society than say like we are here in the States. And I'm not saying that's like better or worse or what have you, but they tend to pull together about issues like this a lot more than some other cultures around the world. So yeah, they're pretty strict about regulating like saliva flying through the air and infecting people. Like they're pretty methodical about being cautious about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I'm looking forward to Wrestle Kingdom. Right, so we've got 2 more stories. Next, so this Wednesday on Dynamite, we saw probably one of the biggest shockers I've known for a while. This guy right here was able to pick up a big victory against Chris Jericho. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think what they were trying to do is they're trying to have, and I said this on Dynamite After Dark, they're either trying to have their 1, 2, 3 kid moment where Sean Waltman went over Scott Hall, Razor Ramon in the early 90s, which basically created his career, or vice versa. They're trying to do the John Cena ruthless aggression, where he came out and slapped Kurt Angle in his SmackDown debut. It's a hell of a debut, man. I mean, Tony Khan must see a lot in this kid, so I'm curious to see where they go because that's about as brilliant of a debut as you could possibly have as an up and comer.
Absolutely. I mean, what really annoyed me is actually it screwed me over in AFW because I actually said Jericho were going to win, but hey, I mean, yeah.
And in fact, when I saw that there was just some kid in the ring that didn't even have an introduction, I was like, oh, they're putting this young up and coming Jericho out there to get over with the crowd with an enhancement talent.
I mean, plus, didn't he get signed to AEW as well?
Yeah. They announced after the match that he's, they put up the he's all elite, that little poster they put up every time they sign somebody.
There you go. I mean, but who knows? I mean, I'm excited to see what this kid can obviously bring.
Yeah, I want to see too. I mean, he looked good. He looked green, but he looked good. So, I mean, and obviously, he's in the ring with one of the greatest of all time. So, yeah, let's see what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to end on obviously something positive because I didn't even know this, but first question I've got for you, do you remember who this wrestler is?
Yeah, Kylie Ray. I remember her.
Right.
She was in Impact and she was in the early days of AEW as well.
Now, she's celebrated a 40-month sobriety recently. I didn't know that obviously she had some stuff like this. I mean, this is a story where you like to see, stuff like this. I mean, your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember when she was around when AEW first started. and she didn't last very long. She just kind of disappeared, and then she went back to Impact for a little while. Then she disappeared from Impact, and she kind of abruptly retired from wrestling. And apparently, it's because she, has a lot of issues with panic disorder and anxiety issues, a lot of mental health issues.
Yeah.
And apparently, she must have rehabilitated herself a bit while she was away. She had come back to Impact for a brief stint, and apparently now she's in WWE. So, I think that's great. I'm a big mental health advocate, so I'm very happy to see somebody overcome that and make it back to the big time.
Yeah, I mean, something like this really made me think. It's like all the wrestlers that we know. I mean, we never know what goes off during their personal lives. It kind of makes you think a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And the life of a pro wrestler is very hard anyways. And especially if you're on the level of like Impact or below, you probably have to have a regular full-time job in addition to being a full-time wrestler and dieting and keeping yourself in shape and making sure you don't develop ring rust and tending to injuries. And it's a tough life, man. It's a really tough life.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, congratulations, obviously, to 14 months sobriety. So that's obviously goes into a perfect segue for our main event.
The main event.
I still don't know he's playing that coin.
Oh, yes. All right. Well, the main event, we decided that we were going to take a watch at Beyond the Mat, which is like a legendary documentary which covered the world of professional wrestling back in the late 90s, the Attitude Era.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of an interesting little documentary. So, but of course, the main event is all yours.
Yes, sir. Well, just to kind of give a little introduction here, Beyond the Mat was released October 22nd, 1999. And it was directed / written / produced by a man named Barry Blaustein, who was a comedy writer. And apparently he used to be involved in Saturday Night Live. And he wrote and produced the Nutty Professor films with,
which is a really good movies, by the way.
Yes. I've probably seen the first Nutty Professor 100 times. So it's one of the most fantastic comedy films of the 90s. So, but apparently this guy was like a big wrestling fan, and he had watched it for many years and decided he wanted to really do a documentary to kind of teach people who probably don't know a lot about wrestling about the ins and outs of wrestling. And so he decided to enter the documentary world, and he created Beyond the Mat.
Now, this is kind of interesting because if I remember rightly, this is the first documentary which gave an insight to wrestling, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Wrestling with Shadows with Bret the Hitman Hart, it was a documentary specifically about him, was filmed around that same time, but I don't think it came out until after Beyond the Mat. I think Beyond the Mat actually came out first, even though Wrestling with Shadows was filmed prior to. But yeah, I mean, this was like kind of the first big expose of behind the curtain pro wrestling. So yeah, I mean, this is pretty big, man. This is huge.
Absolutely. It's a really great, obviously. I mean, I will be honest. Obviously, there's some things we'll cover later which really surprised me, but of course, we'll get into those.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as the movie goes, the movie was a big success because I looked this up on Wikipedia before we did the show, and this movie had a budget of $500,000, right? And it earned $2 million at the box office. So this was a very profitable film. And I think that's kind of a testament to how popular professional wrestling was in pop culture during this era, which I know I've mentioned on the show many times before. But yeah, a documentary film about pro wrestling brought in $2 million at the box office. That's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I remember, obviously this is during the Monday Night Wars as well. So the obviously the wrestling industry was pretty high. So I can see why it was 2 million.
Yeah, I mean, this was a very hot time. And this was co-produced by Ron Howard, the famous Hollywood film director who's got a huge resume of movies from over the years. And apparently And I found this out by listening to Bruce Pritchard's podcast covering Beyond the Mat. I went and listened to that as part of my research for this to discuss this today. He pointed out that Ron Howard was actually Vince McMahon's neighbor. And Ron Howard is friends with Blaustein and kind of linked up Vince McMahon and Blaustein to do this documentary. So that's the reason why Vince McMahon got on board with this. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have happened.
You can just imagine, though, can't you? Just all sat in backyard going, "Hey, I'm doing a documentary. You interested?"
Yeah. I wonder how that went. I wonder if Ron Howard just like walked over to Vince McMahon's door and knocked on his door. Hey, Vince, this is Ron Howard. I don't know. I'd be interested to know how that happened.
I can imagine. Absolutely. Now, if I remember rightly, ECW and WWE did take part of this, but WCW refused.
That is correct. And from the research I did, it appears that Eric Bischoff and WCW wanted to be an executive producer of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Blaustein didn't want to give up any authority. You know, he wanted it to be kind of an independent film, really covering wrestling without a bias. So he declined, and WCW refused. So we got to see WWE and we got to see ECW. No WCW participation at this point.
Now, if I remember, obviously, I did a bit research on this as well. After the success of obviously the documentary, WCW actually realized they made a big boo-boo, as we shall say.
Surprise, surprise, right?
There you go. But
WCW made a lot of missteps during that time.
Do you think there's more to it, though? Why they actually refused? Is it because obviously the competition as well, what were in it?
Yeah, I think so. I think the fact that they wanted to get a producer credit in order to steer it in their direction creatively. So they probably wanted WWE and ECW to be completely cut out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably just wanted it to be about WCW, which, I mean, you know, if Beyond the Mat was strictly just about WCW, it would be shit compared to what we actually got. So I'm glad that Blaustein stuck to his guns and stuck with WWE and ECW.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously in this documentary, it follows three very, very well-known wrestlers. So the first one is, of course...
Well, we've got three here. We've got Mick Foley, who is kind of the guy that was at the height of his career in this film.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Terry Funk, who's kind of at the end of his career, contemplating retirement. And then we have the legend Jake the Snake Roberts, who was kind of at the low point of his life and career. So we kind of get to see a little bit of each spectrum in wrestling fandom, so to speak. Still on top, on the way out, rock bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, what did you reckon to obviously the Terry Funk section? Obviously, when he went to the doctors and he mentioned about, I think it were his knees, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. The doctor told him that he needed a total knee replacement, and he was like, "Well, doc, do you think that if I just don't have the surgery, that I could just live the rest of my life?" And the doctor was like, "Look, man, I don't see how you're even moving around." Much less continuing to wrestle and continuing to walk.
Yeah, I mean, you could actually tell the way he was walking that you could tell he was hurting from obviously because he's a living legend, as we all rightly know. So
Terry Funk is amazing. Terry Funk is one of those guys that you know, he was an old school guy, an old school NWA guy, and then eventually became a hardcore legend. So I mean, he kind of transcended both camps of wrestling, so to speak, the old school NWA guys and then the new school like hardcore extreme guys of the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the movie we saw one of your favorite parts, and if I say the word puke, you'll know what I mean.
He's gonna puke. He's gonna puke. I love of course they talk about Darren Drozdov here. For anybody that doesn't remember Mr. Drozdov, he went by the persona of Puke because he could puke on command, apparently. Mr. Drozdov was paired with the Legion of Doom. I don't know why, but he was paired with the Legion of Doom. But yeah, there's a scene in here where and Bruce Pritchard said this was kind of a contrived scene, that they sat at Vince McMahon's desk in his office and talked about what his gimmick's going to be. And, Vince McMahon is like, well, I heard that you can puke on command. So it's pretty logical that you should go by Puke. You should be Puke. Puke is a fantastic thing.
So when he obviously announced it was going to be Puke, what did you actually think? Because I was like, really?
I thought it was just so like with the times. I mean, that was Vince McMahon in 1998. And he takes the bucket, he takes the garbage can from his floor, puts it on the desk, and goes, "I just need you to do one last thing for me. I need you to puke." And then, Draws is dry heaving, trying to get something out, and he goes, "He's gonna puke. He's gonna puke."
Yeah, I think it's really. The interesting thing is, like, apparently that wasn't actually scripted. That was just basically went in, recorded, and that's what they came up with, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it was a contrived scene. Like they had already discussed, and Draws already knew what his character was going to be and everything, but they just did this little kind of reenactment of like a contract negotiation where he's sitting down and they're discussing his character, totally put on, but it was funny though. It was pretty entertaining. I think he was freaking out a little bit because he couldn't actually regurgitate as much as he had intended.
Yeah, it's the only time I watch a wrestling documentary going, really?
But one thing I want to touch on too, right before the scene, is you see Vince McMahon meeting with some of his merchandising people, his executive staff, and they talked about how the WWE is neck and neck with South Park in merchandise sales. Now, for anybody in my age group, you'll know, I was in high school during all this, you would know that pro wrestling and South Park were like the two cool things to like. Back in the late 90s. So that was like their number one competition was South Park. I just thought that was it was noteworthy and funny at the same time.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, everybody loves South Park. I mean, it's still going today. Not as I don't think it's as popular as it was back then, but to be compared to one of probably the biggest franchises, I think late 90s, I mean, says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, late 90s, you think WWE, you think South Park, you think like Jerry Springer. I mean, those kind of like shocking forms of entertainment and presentation styles, that's what was so incredibly popular in the late 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And what else? Obviously, we saw something about obviously the training schools.
Yeah, so once we kind of get past a little introduction about the WWE, we meet this fella named Roland Alexander. Now, Mr. Alexander is no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. But he ran a school for his league APW, and he seemed like a real kind of shyster kind of guy.
Yeah,
there was kind of some conflicting information about whether or not he was paying everybody after his shows. He's like, "Yep, everybody performs, and I pay them every single night." But we see one of his students is like, he only paid me money if he thought I had a good match. Otherwise, he'd tell me to F off. So I think this kind of just points to the carny nature of the seedy underbelly of like independent wrestling, especially during that time, because wrestling was so hot. There were indie promotions on every corner of the planet.
Well, here's the thing, obviously, because I obviously at the time I only knew obviously WWE. I didn't understand obviously the underbelly. So when I saw this, I'm like, oh, so there's actually under like WWE type thing, like the indie scene. I'm like, oh, okay. So it was kind of like, surprise to me.
Yeah, I mean there were a lot of indies, man. I mean, I knew a guy who wrestled on the indies back during this time period. It was a guy I went to high school with. I mean, wrestling was just like blooming everywhere. I mean, backyard wrestling became a big thing. I know we've discussed that before. I mean, there was like cosplaying of pro wrestling going on all over the place. It was a good time to be a fan. It really was.
Absolutely. Before we get into obviously our next section, Effing Wrestling says,
what about North CA Park?
I think it means North Park, South Park.
Yeah, well, North Park sucked. All right. Like that was the ripoff. South Park was by far the best.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And East Park, West Park, they don't matter either. It's all about the South Park, pal. You got to go down to South Park, not up to North Park.
Going down South Park. Oh, wait.
I saw that comment. And it just, I guess I had a brain fart. I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? I just forgot we were talking about.
Oh dear. Yeah. So obviously in this documentary as well, two of his students get a tryout for WWE.
Yeah.
Which this was kind of, again, obviously it's great to see obviously new talent, but go ahead, talk about this.
Yeah, so the two talents that we saw from Mr. Alexander's APW school are Mike Modest and Tony Jones. Now, I did a little research on these two, and they both had very, very brief stints, and I mean like individual matches for WWE. They had several of them. So we kind of see here they go with Roland Alexander to a Monday Night Raw taping, and they perform a dark match, which is kind of a tryout match. You see Vince and Cornette and Jim Ross all sitting backstage watching and analyzing this match that they had. You know, they both come away thinking, all right, I'm going to get a call from the WWE. And I think it was quite a while after the film was released before either one of these guys made their way back. But they both did eventually wrestle in WWE again.
Yeah, and then absolutely. And then obviously after the match, I think Ross obviously gave Jones some advice.
Yeah. He's like, you got to work on your upper body there, pal. You got to work your arms and get something a little more flattering. You know, it's just that kind of, you know, the old school aesthetics that they want in a wrestler. They want you to be hulked up. They want you to look like a bodybuilder. That's what Vince McMahon liked, and that's what the WWE promoted.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, watching this as a fan, I mean, obviously you're seeing tryouts. What did you think from a fan's point of view?
I mean, I didn't see the whole match, obviously, but the clips I saw, you know, they looked green, obviously. I thought Modest looked really good. I thought he had a good physique and everything. And apparently, Mike Modest went on to wrestle in Pro Wrestling Noah through the mid 2000s. So I think he made a little quip here about how the WWE didn't call me, but you know, that's fine. I'm kind of more suited for Japan, anyways. Well, he ended up going to Japan, so I thought that was cool. You know, because I looked up his Wikipedia and just to see, you know, what he did after this movie, and that's what he did. He wrestled in Japan.
There you go. Now, obviously, after this bit with the tryouts, we saw obviously Terry Funk now outside the ring. Now, this was kind of made me smile because it's like this is the first time you're seeing one of your favorite wrestlers outside the ring, not portraying a character, just being a general person.
Yeah, Terry Funk seems like an awesome dude. Did you see him in that Chevrolet commercial?
Yes, I did.
Come on down to Amarillo Chevrolet and get you a pickup truck. Yeah, I love that. I thought that was great. Terry Funk just seems like such a likable guy. I mean, he's like the typical kind of Southern American grandpa. Is kind of what he reminds me of. It's funny because they show that and then they transition to showing, you know, clips of him working in FMW in Japan with Onita and Mick Foley and like the exploding barbed wire matches.
Yeah, but obviously then after that, he got a little bit serious, obviously with his family, talking about obviously his health. I mean, he went to the doctors and he still like wanted to wrestle. I mean, what does that say, really?
I think it really kind of gets into the mind state of the professional wrestler, especially the old school guys. I mean, they just believe that you just wrestle till you're dead, basically. You know, like you don't stop, you don't retire. There's not a retirement plan. You just keep going because that's what you do. That's your identity. You're a professional wrestler. And you know, we could see here that you know, his daughters are trying to talk him out of wrestling, and his wife, who's now deceased as well, she passed away a couple years ago. She's trying to talk him out of wrestling as well. And once that gets in their system, man, it's just kind of hard to work it out.
Yeah, I think as obviously Terry Funk's a big part of the ECW days. Obviously, we know how extreme obviously ECW is. What can we say really with that?
Oh yeah, you know, we see footage of him going to the ECW pay-per-view, the very first pay-per-view they ever did. It was called Barely Legal back in 1997, and they opened up with this shot of the crowd chanting pay-per-view. Which I thought that was pretty fun. I thought this was a fascinating part of the film because, you know me, I'm an old school ECW guy anyways. So I absolutely love this. You saw like a really inspirational speech from Paul Heyman where he's like rallying the troops and telling everybody they need to thank Terry Funk because this is all built on his back. I mean, Terry Funk was the star of that first ECW card, that first ECW pay-per-view. Wasn't the first card, but he was like the star. Like he was the one that had name value. He was the one that had the drawing power, and they really did build their company during the Extreme era around Terry Funk.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, during this as well, this is where obviously Funk wins the title in probably a spectacular fashion. I really enjoyed this match.
Yeah, and I thought it was cool too. Like you see him at the end, and he's like all covered in blood, and he's like, "We did it, we did it!" And then like you see like 10 minutes later, he's backstage getting patched up, and he's like coughing up blood and having trouble breathing. It's like, man, they get that adrenaline dump in them, and when they're in a big monumental moment like that, it's like there's just no pain to be had. You know, like he wasn't coughing out in front of the fans. He didn't start that till he got backstage. Um, it's just a rush that you and I are never going to fully understand.
No, we're not. We can guess, but until we're not in that moment, so we can't really comment on it. Really, can we?
No, no. I mean, it's impossible to know because we've never been in their shoes, and we're never going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, obviously, next off, we focus on probably one of my all-time. What is definitely in my top five is obviously Mick Foley. Now we know how crazy this guy is in the ring, but behind the scenes, it's just like a family man. I mean, let's be honest.
Foley's awesome. I mean, Foley was the best part of this film. Mick Foley and his story here, he's profiled. You find out, you know, how big of a fan he was growing up. You see a little bit of his old Dude Love footage when he was a backstage wrestler as a kid. That's always fun to watch. Yeah. I mean, he's a brilliant guy. He's a very smart guy. Of course, he looks like a barbarian, and he gets flung through pieces of furniture and all this and that. It's such a dichotomy of you've got this brilliant intellectual man, and then he's like broken down and beaten up and looks like a homeless guy, to be quite frank.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, he got asked what could he do outside wrestling, and he couldn't answer it, which says like once you get into that mindset of like not just all you know is wrestling, it's like it's hard to get out.
Yeah, I mean, he talks here very clearly about how he wants to retire when he's like 35, 36, but he has no exit strategy. You know, people ask him like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I don't really know what else I can do. And I think that's how a lot of these guys operate. They're pro wrestlers. You know, that's just what they do. They haven't had day jobs in a long time, and they don't know what else they would do. I think that just gets in their head and, you know, keeps them going because that's just who they are. And I mean, what else are they going to do in life?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, we'll get into what nearly actually killed the movie. That's obviously we'll end that at the end. But now let's get to probably one of the most shocking things. This is the only time I've watched a documentary where it's like I'm speechless, and it's obviously the Jake Roberts outside the ring. I mean, there's so much based on Jake Roberts in this documentary. I mean, what can we say?
Yeah, Jake was having a hard time at this point of his life, to say the least. You know, we got to see some pretty bad things that you know, he was going through, and you know, it was interesting. You see him going to this independent show where like Coco Beware's there, and you know, it's all like older guys that are on the way down. They just aren't that big of draws anymore. And here's Jake Roberts, you know, coming out, you know, quite possibly maybe under the influence of something, with a snake inside of a bag, going out to do his old song and dance routine. And it's interesting. I mean, there's a scene backstage where you see like he's literally smoking a cigarette and he takes a piss inside of a random bucket. That's backstage.
Yeah,
I don't know if they didn't have toilets there or what, but
is that Indie 101, or am I just missing something here?
I think they call those the shindies, right? The shitty indies.
But yeah, but sticking obviously Jake, I mean, he obviously talked about obviously his relationship with his father, which it kind of hit home because I know there's obviously people out there who's got the same situation who doesn't have that relationship. I mean, what did you think?
Yeah, Jake has a very messed up family lineage. And if you want kind of a deeper dive beyond this movie, there's a Dark Side of the Ring episode specifically about Grizzly Smith and the children.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, you want a record day? Go watch that. I mean, it's like really, really heavy stuff. Grizzly Smith was a real piece of work. Yeah, I don't even want to get into everything they said about him on there because I don't want to risk monetization here, but you can look it up for yourself. Watch that episode if you're really inclined to do so. It's a bit of a gut buster, though. I'm not gonna lie. You're gonna put you down a little bit.
Yeah, this is probably, like I said, the part of the show where I really it kind of like stumped me, because it's like, how hard is it going to be not having that relationship with his father? I think he said that he got to a point where he very rarely talked to him.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I know, they were pretty estranged. Of course, there's Jake Roberts and his sister Rockin' Robin, who was also in wrestling, and then Sam Houston, his brother, that was also a pro wrestler back in the '80s. None of them were close to Grizzly at all. They were all estranged from him because, he allegedly, liked younger females, and that caused a lot of problems with them. He just wasn't a very good guy. He really wasn't. He wasn't a good father. He wasn't a very good man in general. So I feel really bad for Jake and how he was raised, because he just didn't have that father figure. And you could see here in the film that his daughter comes into the scenario here, and there's like a reunion between him and his daughter, and it's very awkward, and they have a good heart-to-heart conversation, and it's just, you can just tell that on both sides there's a lot of hurt to be had. But I do know that they have patched things up over the years.
I do believe he's his manager now.
Yeah. This daughter that was in Beyond the Mat is apparently his manager now, and she's also managing some other people as well. So I mean, that's good. I'm glad to see that there's some closeness between them. And there's another film that we probably need to watch at some point called The Resurrection of Jake Roberts, and it goes into detail about Jake's recovery, going through DDP's sober house, and reconciling with his daughter, and his daughter becoming his manager, and them getting close again. I mean, it's a very, very good feel-good story. I cried a little at the end of that one. It was, we're probably gonna have to watch that one as a palate cleanser for this one when it comes to Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but obviously when I watched the bit with obviously with his daughter, even I got tears in my eyes, because it's like you could tell that he was trying, but because he was so, I don't want to say mentally scarred, but so damaged, he just didn't know what to do. I mean, that was kind of hard to watch.
And I think that he just didn't know how to be a father, because Grizzly was never a father to him. So he didn't know how to be a father, and all he knew was you go out, you travel, you be a pro wrestler, you make money. That's all he knew. And then you do what you have to do to sustain that lifestyle, whether it's taking pills or snorting cocaine or whatever. That's what he got roped into, just to kind of keep the drive going, to keep going and keep pushing to make more money. Because like we said, there's no retirement in pro wrestling. So you just got to earn it and bank it up.
She's also the manager of Buff now as well. So
yes. Yeah. So who of course is another DDP sober house client as well. So, I think that's good, man. I think that's awesome that she's helping these guys out and getting them on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously after this, we saw a lot of like a few wrestlers you wouldn't expect. Like, I actually forgot this was Spike Dudley. I had to watch this again because I wasn't too sure. But yeah, we see Spike, we see Chyna, we see Coco Beware, we see quite a few little things.
Like, we got to talk about the Spike Dudley Shakespeare scene here, because I thought it was great that they got him after a match, and he's got blood coming all the way down his face. He probably got smashed up with a ladder or a chair or something. And they're like asking him, oh, so you studied English literature, right? Yeah, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan. And they're talking about like Shakespearean quotes while this guy's got blood dripping literally into his mouth as he's talking. I just think it's a perfect aesthetic. It really is.
Yeah, and then obviously I forget for his name. Is it Bao? I can't even say his name now. The guy who directed it originally.
Oh, Blaustein.
Obviously, he has a good little friendship with New Jack, which no, New Jack, the guy's an absolute nutcase. But yeah, this was kind of nice to see.
Yeah, New Jack, another one that passed away recently. R.I.P. New Jack. I mean, it's just sad to say there's a lot of people in this film that are no longer with us. But this had the famous scene where he goes out to Los Angeles and Barry gets him a chance to meet with some Hollywood cast people, and the famous quote that was going around for years: "He's not Denzel, but he could be Denzel's pal." Can you imagine watching a movie with Denzel Washington and like New Jack is like his friend and confidant?
Like, you gotta be honest. Like, it would be funny to watch.
It would be great. I would have loved to have seen it. Now I don't know if New Jack ever did any films or not. If he did, they were like D-list bargain bin films. But you know what? I would have liked to have seen him get his shot at being Denzel's pal.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
feel shit that we didn't get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Then obviously we went back to Terry Funk, which he obviously finally announced his retirement, and yeah, it's kind of like the build up to his final match, which obviously it wasn't. But go ahead.
Yeah. So apparently there was this big kind of super show going on called WrestleFest, and ECW was pretty heavily involved in it. And then Bret the Hitman Hart, who was the active WWF champion at the time, decided that he was going to work the show, and I guess Vince allowed him to do so, to work the Terry Funk retirement match. And I think it's interesting here. We see this guy named Dennis Stamp, who I'm not familiar with Dennis Stamp in the world of wrestling, but apparently he was an old NWA guy that was pretty good friends with Terry Funk. So you kind of see him here, and they chronicle him, and he's kind of the I'm not bitter, but I'm actually bitter type.
Mm-hmm.
He's the type that's like, yeah, well, F and Wrestling is correcting me, saying it's Bret and WCW. Is that the case? Was that Bret and WCW at this point?
It was.
I thought they said that he was WWF champion, but I could be wrong. But
yeah, go ahead.
Anyway, so this Dennis Stamp guy is funny. He's like, I'm not going to come to the show because you didn't book me. If you didn't book me, I'm not coming to the. He like throws this little temper tantrum on Terry Funk. And then it cuts to a little montage where he's like talking about how he's like staying in shape so that he could come back and wrestle at a moment's notice at age 50. And he literally gets on a trampoline in black tidy underwear, jumping up and down on the trampoline with hand weights. And this is apparently how the guy stayed in ring shape.
I don't even know. I mean, I don't even know what to say to that. I mean, I will be honest. I mean, yeah, everybody's got their own ways of keeping in shape, I guess.
Yes, and Funk did retire in WCW, but this was his first, well, not even first retirement, but this was a prior retirement where he claimed he was going to retire. But he did end up working for WCW and WWF after this. He came back as Chainsaw Charlie after this was filmed. So, like, he didn't actually retire. He stuck around for a while, but this is when he was originally thinking of retiring in the late 90s.
Absolutely. And obviously, yeah, he wins with obviously against Bret, which was probably one of the most, I think we described as unique finishes ever.
I like the finish. I thought it was good from an in-ring psychology perspective. I haven't seen the whole match. I've just seen the clips from Beyond the Mat. But from a psychology perspective, you could see Funk hit him with like a German suplex or something, and was kind of pinning him bridged up from the underneath position. And Bret held his arm up, so his shoulder went up, thus making his body pin Terry Funk. So I thought that was like kind of a good old school finish, old school psychology of keeping the heel champion strong, but at the same time not making the outgoing retired babyface look like shit. I thought it was good.
Absolutely. And then obviously we've spoke about it briefly then, but then it goes back to obviously Jake and obviously his relationship with his daughter.
Yeah, so I mean, we see some more about Jake and this strained relationship with his daughter. Of course, it was revealed that after the film came out, he hadn't seen or spoken to her since, which, obviously, we're glad things are better now. But this was a really dark part of the film, and a dark part of Jake Roberts' life. We see kind of him possibly under the influence of some things, rambling into the camera about random stuff. It's quite scary, man. This is not a good look.
No, not at all. And I'm just more glad today that he's actually, I want to say better, if that's probably the correct word.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely better. I mean, he's doing so much better now. Obviously he's done some work in AEW. His podcast, I think, just recently started up again.
Pardon Pardon the interruption, but I've just got a message from Canada Dry. It says, "Tell Jeremy I said his voice sounds extra sexy today."
I fine-tuned the mixer for you, Mr. Canada Dry, so get that bassy aesthetic.
Oh dear. Yeah, I've just literally just read a text out on live air, but you know.
Yeah, that's what we want, Liam. We want an interactive community show. So, yeah, you guys want to say anything to us? Go ahead. We'll look at it on the air and we'll discuss it.
There you go. Now, obviously, we end with probably this nearly actually dethroned the whole movie, but it's if I say Rock versus Mick Foley, you'll know exactly what I mean.
So the famous I Quit match at the Royal Rumble, that's kind of the last sequence, the last act of Beyond the Mat. And this was a doozy, man. I remember watching this one on pay-per-view back in the day when I was in high school. I bought this and watched it. Brutal match, man. Foley got beaten all to hell. Unprotected chair shots, got his hands handcuffed behind his back while The Rock just teed off on his face. Ooh, it's hard to watch in 2022, knowing that they don't even allow headshots anymore, even protected. And I think it's in large part because of this match.
Yes,
absolutely brutal. And his family didn't take too kindly to it either.
No, there's obviously, you see footage of obviously them I want to say distress because, I mean, as you mentioned there, I mean, even now when we watch it, we're like, oh dear. But so I can't imagine. I mean, does it say how old his kids were? I can't remember.
I don't think it ever said how old they were. I mean, of course, we're talking about Dewey and Noelle Foley here, which they're both still pretty prominent in wrestling. Noelle was training to be a wrestler, and I think she had to give it up because of some health issues. And Dewey, of course, worked for WWE for a couple of years, and I think he just got released in budget cuts last year because of some budgetary cuts. But yeah, both of the Foley kids that are presented in this film, they're still actively involved in wrestling. So apparently this didn't put them off of it too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously after the match, they obviously went backstage, and I love the fact that Mick Foley covered it up by saying, I can't remember, it's a boo-boo. I mean, I'm like, oh.
He's like, Daddy's okay. It's just a boo-boo. He's got blood pouring all the way down. They're like on his little like button-up shirt with his tie is just like covered completely in red mixed with sweat.
Oh dear.
Pretty disturbing image.
Wow. But then obviously the family watched the whole the match back, so he could actually see basically their reaction to the actual match, and I think it kind of hit home a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a brilliant scene because I think a lot of times wrestlers don't understand how they're seen until they watch a loved one react to something they did. And I think that was the case here with Foley. I think that Foley just thought, I'm putting on a good match. This is what's expected. Telling the story of, putting The Rock over as this big evil corporate heel and, what have you. But then when he went back and saw it and saw that his family was sitting out there taking these unprotected headshots repeatedly over and over and over again, I think he was like, oh, that's I didn't think I was going to have this kind of effect on the people closest to me. And, I think sometimes wrestlers need a reminder of that their families, it takes a toll on their families too, whenever they do things like this.
Absolutely. So obviously that's the end of the documentary. But what do you think, obviously, people could take away watching this documentary?
I think the number one thing to take away from this is that wrestlers are human and it's a very difficult profession. So you can kind of see a degree of difficulty at each level and each wrestler that's individually looked at here, from the guys at Alexander's school who, wrestled a dark match on Raw and they're just going to sit on pins and needles and wait to see if they hear back to see if they're going to get brought into the big company, or Mick Foley being on top and feeling like in order to stay on top, he has to take an inordinate amount of damage in order to remain at the top of the card, or Jake Roberts being destitute, didn't save his money well, blew it all on whatever, having to do small spots in bingo halls and such to try to get by. And Terry Funk can't get out of the game, can't stay out. The drive is just too strong. Can't do it.
Yeah.
It just shows you how the mindset of a professional wrestler works. And on the flip side of that, I think this is a good time capsule that'll show you how extremely popular, no pun intended with the word extreme, how popular pro wrestling was during this time period. This was the hottest time in the business, and they've not been able to replicate it since.
No, absolutely. Do you think it's changed the wrestling industry as of today? Look,
I wouldn't say Beyond the Mat in particular changed the industry, but I mean, this era, of course, definitely changed the industry, both for better and for worse. But I mean, this was by far the hottest time in wrestling, and I thought this was a fascinating look. It was a fascinating time capsule, a snapshot of what it was like to exist in this world back in the late 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. And as it open, I know as it's opened my eyes as a wrestling fan. I'm obviously we're doing these podcasts, but has it opened your eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was very eye opening when I first watched it, like 20 years ago. Because I mean, like we discussed kind of early on, this was like something that wasn't out there. Like there wasn't a documentary that like put cameras backstage that showed you what was going on. And now it's a very common thing. I mean, you could go on the WWE's own network and they have plenty of documentaries where they follow people around with cameras. So I mean, it's commonplace nowadays. Back then it was not. So it was a standard bearer in like showing the ins and outs of wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything you want to add? Obviously what we've discussed.
I would like to see a film kind of like this come out now, showing like the independence and maybe something like AEW.
Interesting. Do you think it'd be a lot different, obviously now, because obviously how much wrestling has evolved?
I do. I think it'd be a lot different now. I don't think drugs are as big of an issue nowadays. It's still an issue, but it's not as big of an issue. I think the culture backstage is a lot different now. I would just be curious to see how things work now compared to back then. And I mean, it doesn't have to be a Beyond the Mat too. It could be somebody completely different do it, but I would like to see somebody take that on because I think it'd be fascinating.
Canada Dry just makes a very interesting point here, and I kind of thought this. He says Dark Side of the Ring is the new Beyond the Mat. Would you agree with that?
Kind of, sort of. Dark Side of the Ring is, of course, people telling stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but there's a difference between being a documentary in the sense of like you're in the moment live and you got cameras in front of everybody's face live as it's happening, as opposed to sitting down 20 years later and telling stories. So, I mean, contextual wise, I think it's the same kind of content, but it's a different aesthetic because you're not actually seeing what's going on live as it happens, like you would with a documentary like Beyond the Mat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a great documentary. I would recommend it. I'm sure there's plenty of places online you can actually watch it.
Yeah, I mean, you can find it out there. I mean, it's on Vudu, it's on YouTube, it's on, I'm sure it's on Apple TV, whatever. I found it on YouTube and I watched it here. So, but yeah, I think it's worth a watch. Definitely. I mean, I know there was a lot of controversy around it. There were some people that didn't like it, that were involved in it, whatever. But I do think it's a good look. It's a good snapshot of wrestling at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could obviously spend another half hour talking about the controversies, but
yeah, I mean, there were some people that weren't very receptive to this,
including Jake. I mean, apparently he said it was tricked into some things in this show, but that's only certain things.
Yeah, and I know Blostein has come out and said that he has no clue what Jake's talking about. So it's just hard to say. I mean, Jake's mind obviously wasn't the sharpest at that time period. So I don't know. I can understand why he didn't like it because he didn't come across very good in it at all, which is why I'm glad that the resurrection of Jake Roberts was made years later to kind of write the story, so to speak, when it comes to Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, final thoughts, obviously, on the Beyond the Mat.
If you haven't seen it, give it a shot. Check it out. Like I said, if nothing else, you can just kind of see what wrestling was like back in the late 90s when it was super, super hot and everybody loved it. And it was on the shelf next to South Park in every store.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So that pretty much wraps the whole show up. But of course, do you want to tell everybody about the mailbox?
Yes, the magic of wrestling at outlook.com. The magic of wrestling at outlook.com. We want to make it a monthly show where we respond to the mailbag. But what we need from you, we need each one of you to send some questions to us that we could pull out of the mailbag and answer them. It could be anything. You can ask me what pants Liam's wearing. I won't know, but maybe he'll answer. I don't know. Throw some questions in there. Ask me what flavor of Monster I like. How many push-ups I could do. Here's a hint. It's not many. Whatever you want to ask. Magic of Wrestling at Outlook.com. Send it. We'll answer it.
Absolutely. And of course, as you can see at the bottom, we are releasing our dates for January. That will be on the 22nd of this month. I mean, we've got some good little things in the pipeline, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. We're going to do some deep dives into some things here. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to discuss some historical things. And, it's a good discussion. Good discussion to be had.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, me too. So don't forget you can head to fmwrestling.com. You can find all our social medias on there. No, at the bottom. There we go. You can head to Facebook, you can head to Twitter, you can head to YouTube. We're pretty much everywhere, right?
Right. And if you like classic wrestling, go to prowrestlingtees.com/allfnwrestling and you can find the official merchandise of Adrian Adonis. So if you're into old school wrestling, check it out.
Absolutely. And of course, we've obviously got our own Pro Wrestling Tea Store /FM Wrestling. We've got the Magic of Wrestling shirt. We've got Wrestling with the Paranormal shirt. We've got the AFW shirt. We've got literally shirts coming everywhere, right?
And they're very good looking too. Like there's I'm not going to mention names, but there's some people on Pro Wrestling Tees that don't have good looking shirts. All Effing Wrestling has good looking shirts.
Don't take my word for it.
Take the expert's word for it.
The expert's always right. So, don't forget you can tune into the All If Wrestling show tomorrow for a Christmas special roundtable. Stay tuned for that.
So, what I'm curious to know, do you know what they're talking about? What is this Christmas special?
I have no idea. I'm just going to tune in the comments and just going to go, hi.
If it doesn't involve Goldust dressed as Santa Claus getting stunned by Stone Cold and thrown in a porta potty like happened on Monday Night Raw, if that's not discussed, I'm going to be highly disappointed.
Yeah, me too. So, any final words from the expert?
I hope you guys have a great week. Thank you for joining us here on the Magic of Wrestling podcast. It's a lot of fun. And, next week, I think we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus with the clip show. And we're going to head into the new year strong, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So, of course, obviously, this is the last show before Christmas. Hope you all having a wonderful Christmas. And, we'll be back after them with some really, really great stuff. That's all. Is that everything else? Have we covered everything?
I believe so, my man. Let's close this thing out.
Absolutely. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next one. Magic Man out.